Vladimir Putin's campaign of violence would not be possible if it weren't for the Wagner Group.
A Kremlin-funded private military company known for its heinous acts in war zones like Syria and Venezuela.
These guys are really notorious. They provide terror.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. On today's program, we're looking at the Wagner Group, the Russian mercenaries, the private army operating in Ukraine. They've reportedly tried several times to assassinate the country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, and are believed to have been involved in massacring civilians in Ukraine. While the Wagner Group is a private military company, it is said to have direct links to President Putin and Russia's armed forces. And while it's best known for its lethal work in Ukraine, its fingerprints are to be found all over the world, from Latin America to Africa and the Middle East. As with all private armies, the group is highly secretive. But here's what we know, or think we know, about the Wagner Group. When Russia launched its attack on Ukraine in late February, it also allegedly sent in a small private army known as the Wagner Group. According to the Times newspaper, it was tasked with assassinating President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky found out about the plot and put the capital under a hard curfew for 36 hours in order to catch the would-be assassins.
За наявною у нас інформацією, ворог позначив мене як ціль номер 1, мою родину як ціль номер 2. Вони хочуть знищити Україну політично, знищивши главу держави.
The president has now reportedly survived multiple attempts on his life, at least 2 by Wagner mercenaries. The Russian government denies it deployed the Wagner Group and says it has no links to private armies, which are illegal in Russia. The West doesn't believe that.
We've got to tighten the economic vice around Putin, sanctioning more people today as we are, sanctioning the Wagner Group, looking at what we can do to stop Putin using his gold reserves, but also doing more to help the Ukrainians defend themselves.
The following month, Christo Grozev, the head of the investigative website Bellingcat, told British MPs that nearly 8,000 Wagner mercenaries had been deployed to Ukraine and that 3,000 of them had already been killed.
These sources, or some of these sources, have actually validated to us a striking number of participation by Wagner officers in the war at the moment, which is close to 8,000. That is much higher than we expected. But more importantly, they've also given us a sense for a very high casualty rate amongst the Wagner private military mercenaries, which is about 1/3 of these people, so about 3,000 people.
Grozev also reported that Wagner mercenaries were present at the massacre of civilians in Bucha in March, corroborating a similar claim made by Germany's intelligence agency. While Russia denies official links to the group, the head of Ukraine's security services has called the Wagner Group Putin's private army. But this is where experts differ. Some believe Putin does effectively control the Wagner Group and that it is run by Russia's main foreign intelligence agency, the GRU. But more often, experts describe the Wagner Group as fully private sector, owned by Yevgeny Prigozhin, a Russian oligarch close to Putin. His umbrella company, Concord, owns Wagner, which is run by Dmitry Utkin, who founded the group in 2014. Yevgeny Prigozhin is unusual. Unlike other oligarchs who made their fortune through energy or finance, Prigozhin's business is food, the wholesale sausage market, restaurants, and catering for Russia's army. That's why he's sometimes known as Putin's chef.
The investment, at least until 2016, came mostly from the corporate structures, the catering companies run by Prigozhin overcharging for their services to the state by approximately 20%. So this 20% surcharge, in fact, funded the operation of the military company.
The man who runs the Wagner Group, Dmitry Utkin, is a former colonel in Russia's special forces, the Spetsnaz. His call sign was Wagner, after Richard Wagner, Hitler's favorite composer. Utkin's believed to have neo-Nazi sympathies. He's rarely caught on camera, but he was photographed with Vladimir Putin after receiving the Order of Courage award from the president in 2016. In a way, the Wagner Group doesn't really exist. Experts say it's not a single legal entity, it's more like a shadowy network of several small firms, which makes it more difficult to monitor. Difficult, but not impossible. its activities around the globe have been tracked by the US, the UN, and the EU for years.
They present a threat and create instability in a number of countries around the world.
The Wagner Group's first major mission was during Russia's annexation of Crimea in February 2014. Working alongside regular Russian forces, some dubbed them the Little Green Men because they were masked and wearing unmarked green uniforms. They then deployed to eastern Ukraine, reinforcing pro-Russia separatist forces in Donbass. After Ukraine, the Wagner Group expanded its operations, always in support of or aligned with Russia's interests. In the Middle East, we're talking about Syria and Libya. In Africa, multiple countries, including Mali, Mozambique and Madagascar, Central African Republic and Sudan. Their operations have even reached Latin America, most notably Venezuela, where they were reportedly sent to protect President Nicolás Maduro. They've often made the headlines for all the wrong reasons and have been accused of carrying out human rights abuses pretty much everywhere they've operated. So why then does Russia, the second most powerful military in the world, allegedly use them? Experts always give two main reasons. First, using the Wagner Group gives Russia plausible deniability. In other words, Wagner does Moscow's dirty work, and Russia officially keeps its hands clean. And second, it protects Putin's image at home. Russian soldiers returning in coffins draped in the flag upsets people. The public don't care nearly as much about dead mercenaries. Well, let's just pick up on that last point, the idea that Wagner mercenaries are essentially expendable. The evidence suggests that's probably true. A couple of years ago, around 200 of them were killed by US forces in Syria in just a few hours in what became known as the Battle of Khasham. The mercenaries attacked a US-protected base there, guarding the Conoco oil and gas refinery in Deir ez-Zor province. The Americans retaliated with massive firepower from the air, wiping them out. US commanders say they did check with their Russian counterparts first.
So you called and said, stop this?
Yes, I did. What response did you get? Those are not our forces.
Well, this was a huge blow for Wagner mercenaries, and the US claims to have intercepted them, complaining about their huge losses.
They turned that place into hell, and they knew very well it was us, Russians. Ours were coming to seize the plant, and they were sitting at the plant. Many, very many are missing. It's another humiliation. No one is treating us seriously. They treat us like I think our government will now pretend that nothing happened and will not respond with anything. That's how big the losses we had.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And Sean McFate is a former officer in the US Army who then became a private military contractor and is now an academic who's researched the Wagner Group extensively. Jelena Aparac is also an expert on mercenaries and advises the United Nations about their activities, especially in Libya and the Central African Republic. And finally, we have Andrew Milburn, a former US Marine and founder of the Mozart Group, who's currently helping to train Ukraine's military. Welcome to all of you. Sean McFate, every private military company works for money. Who is the client here? Who's paying for their operations in Ukraine?
The client here is Russia. It's the Kremlin, and the Wagner Group has been working to extend Russian national and foreign interests since 2014.
All right, so the thing is, we have this debate, don't we? Does Putin control it? Does he own it? Is it run by the GRU? Is it run by the oligarch? How would you best describe the ownership of the Wagner Group?
Well, it's run by Prigozhin, who's an oligarch close to Putin. And of course, within Russia, it's hard to know where Putin's ego ends and Russian foreign policy begins. But Prigozhin owns it, and he controls it under a corporate umbrella group called the Concord Group, which owns Wagner. It owns the Troll Factory, the Internet Research Agency, and it owns several oil and gas companies.
So if Putin tells Prigozhin, you send the Wagner Group in there, that's what he does?
That's what he does. And the way that the Wagner Group has traditionally gotten paid is they may get some payment from the government of Russia, but in places like Mali, Central African Republic, and Syria, what they try to do, what Prigozhin tries to do, is he tries to get like oil and gas and mining rights. And that's the true profit motive for him. So the Wagner Group goes and secures it. The troll factory uses disinformation to create the fog of war. And the way they really get paid is through extractive industry. All of this under the blessing and sanction of Putin.
And in Ukraine, what is their mission there?
Their mission there is to achieve what Russia's strategic mission is there, which is to engulf and swallow up Ukraine into a greater Russian empire.
The initial mission, we were told, was to take out the political leadership of Ukraine, including the president. That has been reported widely. Certainly Ukraine believes that's the case. Do you believe that's the case?
It is. I mean, look, the Wagner Group, what they can do, they have a special forces or Spetsnaz background, or at least they did. They're getting a lot of casualties. They do fifth column operations, which means they infiltrate cities with a kill or capture list for political leadership, for example, or senior military leadership. But they also do, assault, like direct action. And they can do human rights massacres and violations where conscripts may not want or can't do it. That's part of the deal for the Wagner Group. And everywhere they've been in the world, in Africa and the Middle East, there has been a trail of human rights violations. Some of it is due to rogueness. Some of it may be Russian policy. So if we look at massacres like Bucha, for example, we have some indication that they were ordered to do that by the GRU. The GRU, by the way, handles them, but they don't work for the GRU. They work for Prigozhin.
Right. You've kind of answered the question in a way as to why the world's second most powerful military needs the Wagner Group. It is to put that distance between Russia officially and whether it's an atrocity or an assassination, that they want carried out.
It puts distance between Putin and the massacre on the ground, even though that seems absurd to us. It also, this might sound macabre, but the Wagner Group is going to be much more reliable for that mission than 19-year-old conscripts who thought they'd be greeted as liberators. And lastly, it confounds international law because the International Criminal Court doesn't really know. I mean, it's already difficult to use international law, especially International Criminal Court, for any reason. Adding mercenaries into that mix adds another layer of complexity because international law does not address it sufficiently, in my opinion.
We're going to get into that. We're going to get into that in a moment with Jelena. Andrew Milburn, though, if I could just cross over to you. You're in Ukraine. You set up the Mozart Group, which I get is a reference to countering the Wagner Group. But what does your organization do? What are you hoping it will achieve?
Yeah, so first of all, and by the way, Lana, Sean, great to be on a panel with you guys. Really interested in your comments, Sean, right on target. But I do want to say this, okay? So although we're called the Mozart Group, and although you said countering the Wagner Group, that's really not in our mission at all. I succumbed to the name of Mozart Group because my guys came up with it, and it seemed like it was catchy, and it gained traction very quickly. But, to all of Sean's points, we're the antithesis of the Wagner Group. We are not a mercenary organization. There's nothing we do that is counter to U.S. foreign policy. And of course, U.S. foreign policy does not support mercenaries on the Ukrainian front line pulling the trigger. So that's number one. What we do is primarily training, advising, and assisting Ukrainian armed forces in their defensive fight against the Russian Federation. And, Sean, you made a very interesting point, which, as I said, was absolutely correct about the Wagner Group adds a sense of distance from atrocities for the Russian Federation. But, that has broken down completely here. So first of all, the Wagner Group is a bit player in this conflict. I think, as probably everyone is well aware, there's this well-trumpeted intent to take out Zelensky. But it's, as far as actual actions on the ground, they've fallen far short of that. And the Ukrainian security services, the SBU, are just, they put the Wagner Group so far in the shadow that they've been completely eclipsed. But But to your point about atrocities, the average Russian soldier here, sadly, has proven absolutely capable and not at all above committing mass atrocities. Not only that, Putin has almost embraced that, by calling the brigade that slaughtered and raped their way through Bucha heroes. And he did that with a very, some people may say he lost his mind, but that was a very deliberate decision to counter
Andrew,
the weight of evidence coming in. Yeah, please go ahead.
I just want to steer it back to the Wagner Group. Have you encountered them? Have any of the troops that you've trained encountered them?
The Legion, the International Legion, in the early days of the war, the guys we work with, and these are primarily Americans and British volunteers, say that the Wagner Group, they did come across the Wagner Group. There were reports of them wearing black uniforms. However, after we looked into this, and again, we could be wrong, we looked into this, a number of Russian tank crewmen happen to be wearing black uniforms too. So I would say, and we deal across the board with Ukrainian Special Operations Forces on every front and have had no reports of the Wagner Group. The Chechens, by all means, yes, and various units within the Russian both airborne and special operations forces, but not the Wagner Group itself.
Understood. Jelena Aparac, we've seen breaking news today that Human Rights Watch is accusing the Wagner Group of human rights abuses in the Central African Republic. What can you tell us about their operations there?
What we have observed is that there have been actors that could fall within the definition of mercenaries, but principally we were focused a lot on Wagner operating in Central African Republic because simply they have been committing mass-scale human rights abuses and humanitarian law violations, including torture, detention, torture during detention, interrogations, mass killings, massacres, decapitated bodies, extrajudicial killings, forced displacement of civilians, and we can go on sexual violence and rape. So these were the violence that we took.
And let me ask you briefly, they were fighting in Libya on the side of Khalifa Haftar. What can you tell us about their role there?
So we have also observed Wagner in Libya. We have addressed the allegation letter to General Haftar and his troops in June 2020. And we have followed the situation. And again, we addressed it in August 2021, sorry. What we've seen is that they were fighting alongside with Haftar. But again, I would just like to emphasize that we follow also the role of private military and security companies and mercenaries. So we have identified some private security companies operating on the side of the GNA as well as the LNA, and some mercenaries supporting all parties in the conflict. Concretely for Wagner in Libya, they have been used as a sniper, and there have been also other reports that testify that, including there were private military and security companies that were apparently legally registered companies as opposed to Wagner that is not legally registered. And so, yes, again, we have been very concerned about their presence, but not just Wagner, again,
Jelena,
other actors.
Jelena, Wagner is just one of hundreds, probably thousands, of private military companies operating around the world. Given the number of human rights abuses, alleged and actual, that have been carried out by them, why is there no international law banning them?
Well, first of all, I would just like to bring a very important precision. One of the reasons why we are very much concerned about the Wagner is precisely because they don't seem to have any legal existence, as opposed to private military and security companies that have to be, or that usually are registered legally so that we can identify them. They have a statute of corporation, CEO, director, so we can identify who would be responsible person. Wagner doesn't have that legal existence, so it's very difficult to attach the operations of Wagner to a very specific person and to actually hold those persons accountable. But aside of the Wagner issue, the private military and security companies are not regulated by international legally binding instruments. And actually, time to be, next week there is a meeting to discuss the first draft zero on the potentially legally binding instrument, and it will be discussed in Geneva. But so far, we don't have any legally binding instrument.
We'll watch out for that. Sean McFate, we're coming towards the end of the programme. I wanted to ask you about the Wagner Group's fighting prowess. You've called them a tier 1 fighting force. They shouldn't be underestimated. And then you pointed to the Battle of Khasham in Syria as an example of how they're able to take on even the US military. Can you just describe what happened there and why it impressed you, in inverted commas, as much as it has?
Sure. So the Battle of Khasham happened in eastern Syria in February of 2018. And I've talked to members of the Wagner Group who were there and members of U.S. Special Operations Forces like Green Berets who were there. What happened is about 300 to 400 Wagner mercenaries in Syria were moving to take over a natural gas plant. Unbeknownst to them, that natural gas plant was being held by U.S. Special Operations Forces. I mean, the United States' best troops, Delta Force, Green Berets, Marines, and their Kurdish militia. And the Wagner Group had like tanks and armored personnel carriers and artillery. These are not just lone dudes with Kalashnikovs. They are an organized private military. When they met each other, you would assume the Wagner Group would be flattened, but no. The battle lasted for about 2 hours between the Wagner Group, who were taking punches but were not retreating, and the United States Special Forces. And the United States Special Forces called in the U.S.'s best air support, F-15s, AC-130 gunships, drones, Apache helicopters. The Wagner Group guys, the ones I've talked to, said they had no air defense. They had no shoulder-mounted missiles, and they basically got systematically annihilated. Now, the United States killed more Russian speakers that one night than any night during the Cold War. But the reason it didn't go to World War III in 2018 is because both Moscow and Washington could use the plausible deniability of the Wagner Group and say, oh, they're just disposable humans. We don't actually have to follow up and do saber rattling. But that shows you if Wagner can stand up to Delta and to Green Berets, imagine what they can do to civilians in eastern Ukraine.
Okay, Andrew Milburn, I can see. I know you're in a very tight spot there.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please come in.
Very quickly?
Yeah.
Okay. Sean, just a couple of points there. I was at SOC Sand at the time as deputy commander. They didn't stand up to Green Berets or Delta Force. They may have taken a shellacking by indirect fire, but if you could pick up the communications from them, they were in a state of panic at the time. So let's not overplay that one situation. There was no direct firefights between Wagner Group and Green Berets or U.S. troops. They were subject to indirect fire, and as you point out, they took serious casualties, and they actually panicked from our intercepts. I just don't want them to be built into this organization of a more formidable organization than they are.
Andrew,
thugs and police. Sorry, go ahead.
Andrew, you mentioned the intercepts, and we've heard some of that. They sounded like they were really shocked by what happened. People were being, their comrades were being annihilated. And then they found out that the United States commanders got in touch with the Russian counterparts, and the Russians denied it was them. It denied they were with them. I mean, These people are expendable. They are cannon fodder, as they've been described before. I'm just wondering if either you or Sean could tell me, why do they do it? They have no protection in the eyes of the law, these people. They can be disposed of by either side. Why do they do it?
I can jump in. I know Sean's probably got deeper, certainly a more profound answer. But from my perspective, part of the answer is cultural. It's a disturbing, almost I don't know how you put it. The term the Wagner Group doesn't come from nowhere. All right, there's a lot of Viking runology, extreme right-wing weirdness in their makeup, and that is part of it. It's part of their ethos, and it's self-sustaining to an extent, and the money isn't bad by the standards of the Russian Federation.
Yeah. A final answer from you, Sean?
They do it for a couple of reasons. I mean, they're like mercenaries all over the world. Some of them do it because they need the money. Some of them do it because they don't know what else to do with their life. They did several tours in a war zone. They come back. They don't want to bag groceries at Aldi's. Some of them do it because they're sociopaths. And some of them do it because they're lost souls. Also, Russia keeps a thumb on them. A lot of them would rather work for like the United Arab Emirates for more money and less risk. But perversely, Russia has very strong anti-mercenary laws on their law books, even though they hire these mercenaries. And if a Wagner Group is taught, speaking to you or me, or they want to go find new clients outside of Russia, Russia threatens to throw them in jail as mercenaries. It's a very sort of a Russian solution to a Russian mercenary problem.
And Sean McFate, with that point, we have to end the program. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Also, Jelena Aparac and Andrew Milburn, thank you all very much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.